When a young girl emails Elon Musk about a new engine idea, she never expects her life to be changed forever. But what she doesn't know, Elon Musk, the tech billionaire and CEO of multiple groundbreaking companies, is about to take her email more seriously than she could ever imagine. 16-year-old Sarah sat alone in her room, the soft glow of the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, casting a golden hue over her cluttered desk filled with books and papers. She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure of where to begin. These weren't just ordinary words. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to change everything. She had spent months researching, experimenting, and refining this idea. The engine she had conceived could not only change the way we view renewable energy and transportation, but could also help accelerate the world's shift away from fossil fuels. She couldn't just sit back and hope that someone would notice. She had to take action. Dear Mr. Elon Musk, my name is Sarah, and I am a 16-year-old student with a revolutionary engine idea that could change the way we approach sustainable energy and transportation. This concept could speed up the transition to renewable energy sources, decrease our reliance on fossil fuels, and transform how electric vehicles are powered. I believe it can drastically improve electric engine efficiency and make renewable energy more accessible to everyday people at a fraction of the current cost. I would love the chance to explain it to you in more detail. Thank you for your time and consideration, Sarah. She stared at the screen for a long moment, every word seeming to echo in her mind, as if they were all connected in some cosmic way. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from a deep-seated fear that perhaps this was all too much. Would Elon Musk even read this? Would he think she was just a naive teenager, someone too inexperienced to talk about something so big? She thought back to all the sleepless nights, the hours spent calculating, designing, and testing her theories. The spreadsheets, the technical diagrams, the formulas she had meticulously crafted. She knew she wasn't enough. She wasn't enough to face the giants of the tech world. But she also knew that her idea was bigger than that. She just needed one chance to prove herself. Sarah took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and imagined what it might be like if someone truly believed in her. If someone like Elon Musk could see the potential in her idea and take it seriously. With one final shaky exhale, she clicked send. The moment she did, an overwhelming wave of uncertainty flooded over her. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, heart pounding. What if he never sees it? What if it just gets lost in the sea of emails he must receive every day? She couldn't stop the thoughts that began to race through her head, but she knew there was nothing more she could do. It was out of her hands now. Minutes passed, and her anxiety only grew. She kept refreshing her inbox, hoping for a miracle. But the silence stretched on, and the only sound in the room was the soft hum of her computer. She remembered a saying she had once heard. Sometimes, you have to be bold enough to walk into the unknown in order to discover something extraordinary. And right now, that was exactly what she was doing. She had taken the first step. She just didn't know yet how big that step would turn out to be. She glanced at the computer once more, feeling a flutter of hope mixed with fear. What if this changes everything? What if I just did something that could alter the course of everything? Little did Sarah know, the click of that button, just that one simple action, would set off a chain of events that would forever change her life. And not just hers, but the very future of technology itself. Hours passed in a blur as Sarah tried desperately to distract herself. She tried reading, playing video games, even cleaning her room. But her mind kept returning to that one thing, the email. The one she had sent to Elon Musk. Her thoughts raced, as if her mind was a hamster on a wheel that wouldn't stop spinning. What if he never sees it? What if it just gets lost in the sea of messages he must receive every day? She tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept gnawing at her, each passing minute making her more anxious. What if I never get a reply? Her stomach churned at the thought, as if the weight of her hopes was too much to bear. She'd sent the email, yes. But that didn't mean anything would happen. She was just a 16-year-old girl after all. What did she really expect? But deep down, beneath all the doubt, there was a flicker of hope, tiny but alive. She couldn't shake the feeling that something could happen, something big. Meanwhile, across the world, in his sleek office at Tesla, Elon Musk was wrapping up a meeting. His mind was already elsewhere, moving on to the next task as he juggled his responsibilities at Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company. The daily grind of being one of the busiest men on the planet often left little room for anything else. As the meeting finally ended, Elon turned his attention to his phone, which buzzed with a new email notification. He glanced at the screen, expecting it to be from an investor, or perhaps one of his employees. He was used to the constant flood of emails, but this one caught his attention immediately. It wasn't from anyone he knew. It wasn't from an executive at Tesla or SpaceX. It was from an unknown sender. The subject line stood out like a beacon. Revolutionary engine idea. Elon furrowed his brow, skepticism immediately flaring. Another pitch? Another game-changing invention that was probably no better than the hundreds of others that flooded his inbox daily? He was just about to swipe it away when something made him pause. Something about the subject line stirred a spark of curiosity in him. Maybe it was the boldness of the claim or the idea that someone out there, someone completely unknown to him, had the gall to approach him with something this big. He had heard many pitches in his career, but something felt different this time. Without much thought, he clicked it open. He began reading, scanning the email quickly, then slowing down as he absorbed the details. The idea was simple yet intriguing, an engine that could drastically improve electric vehicle efficiency. On the surface, it sounded almost too good to be true, but the more Elon read, the more it started to make sense. There were no vague promises, no unrealistic projections, just a clear, well-constructed idea. The more he read, the more something within him stirred. The young girl who had written this wasn't just offering another piece of tech jargon. She was offering confidence, the kind of raw, unfiltered certainty that could only come from someone who truly believed in what they had created. As he reached the end of the email, Elon paused. His mind went over the idea again. Could it really work? The potential was enormous, and something about the directness of her proposal intrigued him. There was a spark in the way she described her concept, something more than just an idea. It was a vision. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping absently on the armrest as he thought. The sheer confidence behind the email was contagious. He was no stranger to innovation and the sudden flashes of brilliance that could change the world. Was this one of those moments? Elon thought for a moment longer, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Maybe it was worth exploring further. Without hesitation, he pulled up a new message and began typing. It wasn't just another email to dismiss. This wasn't something to overlook. This idea was worth taking seriously. A few days later, Sarah found herself standing nervously outside the doors of Tesla's headquarters. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath, her palms slick with sweat despite the cool air. She had never been so anxious in her life. Nothing had ever felt as real as this moment. She glanced at the sleek, modern building in front of her, the symbol of innovation and ambition that she had always admired. To her, it was more than just the headquarters of a company. It was a place where the future was shaped, where ideas like hers could thrive. But now, it was just a reminder of how small and insignificant she felt in this vast, high-tech world. What if this was all a huge mistake? What if her idea wasn't as revolutionary as she thought? What if it all fell apart the moment she spoke? Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What would he say? Would he dismiss her? Would he even believe in her idea? She had spent so many nights imagining this meeting, but now that it was happening, it felt almost surreal. Her legs wobbled beneath her as doubt gnawed at her thoughts. She had emailed Elon Musk, the man who had transformed industries and reshaped the future. Could she, a 16-year-old girl, really have something valuable to offer him? Could a teenager like her really change the world? Just as her thoughts began to spiral, the automatic doors of Tesla's headquarters slid open, and there he was, Elon Musk himself. He was exactly as Sarah had imagined, dressed in his signature black t-shirt and jeans, his tall figure exuding quiet confidence. His expression was serious but welcoming, as if he had seen this moment 1,000 times before. Though something in his eyes hinted that this meeting was no ordinary one for him either. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward. This is it, she thought, her heart racing. This was no longer just a dream. It was real, happening right now. Elon Musk, standing in front of me. He extended his hand to shake hers, and Sarah's fingers felt numb as they made contact. Sarah, Elon said, his voice calm and focused. I've read your email. Sarah nodded, suddenly at a loss for words. She couldn't believe it. He had actually read it. The email that had felt so insignificant just a few days ago had somehow reached the man whose mind was constantly shaping the future. And now he was standing right in front of her. This wasn't some abstract idea anymore. This was the reality she had hoped for, the moment that could change everything. Elon continued, his voice steady and deliberate. Your idea is unique. But there's more to this than just a new engine. We need to talk. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The way he spoke was calm, almost clinical, but there was a weight to his words that made her pulse quicken. He wasn't just acknowledging her idea, he was taking it seriously. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, she was struck by the magnitude of what was about to happen. She nodded, her mouth dry. We need to talk. The words echoed in her mind, and she struggled to form a coherent response. What could she say? What if her idea wasn't good enough? What if this was all just some kind of misunderstanding? Before she could voice her concerns, Elon gestured for her to follow him. The sleek modern design of the Tesla headquarters surrounded them as they walked down a long corridor. The soft hum of the building's energy-efficient systems the only sound in the otherwise quiet space. Sarah tried to steady herself, but her nerves were a whirlwind. She had entered a world of unimaginable possibilities, a world where her ideas, her dreams, could be realized. As they reached a conference room, Elon opened the door and gestured for Sarah to sit. He took the chair across from her, folding his hands as he studied her, as if trying to gauge her potential. For a moment, they just sat in silence, and Sarah felt the weight of his gaze. She had read about Elon Musk's genius, his ability to spot potential in the most unexpected places. But now, in this room, she realized it wasn't just her idea that had brought her here. It was the possibility that she might be able to bring something to the world that no one else had thought of before. Elon finally spoke, breaking the silence. You're not just a teenager with a cool idea. There's more at play here. Something about this concept feels like it could shift the entire energy paradigm. But there's a lot more to consider than just a good idea. There's risk, there's competition, and There are people who would do anything to get their hands on what you've created." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that. The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. Risk, competition, people willing to steal her idea. She had come here with dreams of changing the world. But what Elon Musk was saying was that it wasn't just about ideas anymore. It was about power. The power to protect what she had created, to defend it against forces she hadn't even begun to understand. Her mind raced as she realized the enormity of what she was about to step into. This meeting, this moment, was only the beginning. It wasn't just about developing a new engine anymore. It was about entering a world filled with danger, technology, and power. A world where ideas could shift the balance of everything. And Sarah had just taken her first step into it. After the meeting, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater than he had anticipated lay within Sarah's idea. He spent the following days diving deeper into her proposal, poring over the technical details, recalculating figures, and consulting with Tesla's top engineers. What had initially seemed like an interesting but unpolished idea began to take shape into something far more profound. As he sifted through the data, Elon's unease grew. This wasn't just an innovative engine, it was something that could revolutionize the entire energy sector. Sarah's concept didn't just improve efficiency, it had the potential to fundamentally change how the world approached renewable energy and electric transportation. The implications were staggering. This could be the breakthrough that finally made global energy sustainability a reality. But with that realization came a mounting sense of concern. As Elon looked at the numbers and examined her designs, a troubling thought kept repeating in his mind. Who else would want this technology? It wasn't just a brilliant innovation. It was a weapon in the race to dominate the future of energy. Whoever controlled this technology would control the future. And there were powerful people and organizations out there who would stop at nothing to seize it for themselves. Sarah was brilliant. There was no question about that. But she was also just a teenager, still learning the complexities of the world she had unwittingly entered. She had created something remarkable, but she hadn't realized the storm she was about to face. She hadn't fully grasped how dangerous this technology could be, not just for the world, but for herself. The more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that protecting this idea, protecting Sarah, was no longer a matter of just building a new engine. This was a race against time. Elon's mind began to race as well. The magnitude of what Sarah had created was beyond what anyone could have imagined. He needed to act fast, before someone else did. In a secure conference room at Tesla, he gathered a team of trusted engineers, cybersecurity experts, and legal advisors. As they examined Sarah's designs, the room fell into a heavy silence. The implications of her work were clear to everyone involved. This could change everything. But that also meant there were many risks involved, and they needed to be prepared for the worst. Sarah was no longer just a young inventor with a bright idea. She was a key player in a much larger, more dangerous game. And Elon knew that if this technology fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. It wasn't just about profit or innovation anymore. It was about protecting the future from those who would seek to use this new energy source for their own agendas. The more Elon thought about it, the more urgent the situation became. This idea had to be protected, at all costs. But protecting it would require more than just security measures. It would require navigating a labyrinth of corporate interests, government regulations, and powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. There were people who had access to resources far beyond what he could imagine. Resources that could be turned into weapons to forcefully take control of what Sarah had created. Elon's thoughts turned to Sarah herself. She was caught in the middle of this storm now, whether she realized it or not. She was part of this race, whether she wanted to be or not. The young woman who had simply wanted to make a difference had inadvertently put herself at the heart of a high-stakes game that would change the course of the future. Elon knew what he had to do. The next steps would not be easy. He needed to protect Sarah from the dangers that loomed ahead, while also ensuring that the idea she had created could be used to shape a better future. He had been through high-stakes situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning in business. It was about shaping the world's future. And now, Sarah was caught in it, whether she understood it or not. For better or worse, she was part of this new world, a world where power, technology, and the fight for control could determine the fate of millions. Days turned into weeks as Sarah and Elon worked tirelessly, driven by a shared urgency to develop the engine technology. Every moment seemed critical. They pushed the boundaries of innovation, tweaking designs and testing prototypes. The world felt like it was on the edge of something monumental, something that could reshape the entire energy landscape. Sarah, who had once been just a curious teenager, was now fully immersed in the high-stakes game of innovation, alongside one of the greatest minds of the modern era. But as the project gained momentum, an unsettling sense of something off began to creep in. It wasn't the usual challenges of engineering or the pressures of keeping up with deadlines. It was something darker, something more dangerous. At first, it was small. Files going missing from the secure servers. Passwords that seemed to have been compromised without any trace of how. Then came the cyber attacks. A sudden, coordinated barrage on their system, attempting to breach their encrypted data. Elon's cybersecurity team worked tirelessly to combat the onslaught, but it was clear, whoever was behind this was no amateur. They were professional, and they had resources that went far beyond what Sarah or Elon could have anticipated. It didn't stop there. Mysterious phone calls began to flood in. Anonymous numbers, cryptic messages, and threats that were subtle, yet unmistakable. At first, Elon dismissed them as possible pranks or corporate competitors trying to rattle them. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. The messages weren't random. They were directed at Sarah specifically. The voice on the other end would always mention her name, implying an intimate knowledge of her personal life and the project she was working on. The tension inside Tesla's headquarters grew thicker by the day. Meetings were held in private. The best minds in cybersecurity and data protection were enlisted to dig deeper, but each attempt to track down the source of the attacks only seemed to reveal more dead ends. It was as if the perpetrators were always one step ahead, covering their tracks with sophisticated techniques that made it nearly impossible to trace them. Sarah had grown increasingly anxious, her earlier excitement about the project starting to shift into fear. Elon, usually calm and calculated, had become visibly more tense. This wasn't just about innovation anymore. They weren't dealing with corporate rivalry or competition. They were dealing with something far more dangerous. One night, after an especially brutal cyber attack, Elon sat in his office staring at the glowing monitor. He had a feeling, an instinct, telling him that something bigger was at play. It wasn't just the technology they were developing that these shadowy figures wanted. It was control. Whoever was behind these attacks wasn't interested in the engine alone. They wanted to harness this technology for their own purposes, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get their hands on it. Finally, after much digging, Elon received a piece of evidence that made everything click into place. A piece of encrypted code, buried deep within the source of one of the cyber attacks, led him to a chilling discovery. There was an underground network, an organized group with the resources to take on Tesla at the highest levels. They weren't just hackers looking to steal data for profit. They had an agenda, a global agenda. And it wasn't just about making money, it was about reshaping the balance of power in the world, with Sarah and Elon's engine technology at the center of it. Elon's expression hardened as he realized the full scope of the danger. This was no longer just a corporate rivalry or a tech competition. It was a battle for control over the future of energy itself, and Sarah and Elon were at the epicenter of it all. The group behind the attacks was sophisticated, with immense resources at their disposal, resources that included highly trained operatives, vast financial networks, and access to powerful political and corporate figures. It became clear that their goal wasn't just to steal the engine technology, it was to monopolize it, and in doing so, to control the future of sustainable energy. They were prepared to use any means necessary, including espionage, sabotage, and even violence, to get what they wanted. Elon and Sarah were now at the heart of a high-stakes war. It wasn't just about who had the best technology, it was about who would control the future. They couldn't just protect their work from digital threats. They had to protect themselves, their ideas, and the future they were fighting to create. Elon looked at Sarah, his face grim. He had always been a man who fought for progress and innovation, but this was different. This was no longer just about creating something groundbreaking. It was about survival. "We need to move faster," Elon said, his voice low and steady. "This technology is too important, Sarah. And now we have to protect it, not just from hackers, but from people who will stop at nothing to take it from us." Sarah nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The weight of what they were facing hit her full force. She had been dreaming of changing the world, but this was more than she had ever imagined. The future wasn't just a path of possibility anymore, it was a battleground, and she and Elon were at the center of it. Elon and Sarah sat in a secure room at Tesla's headquarters, surrounded by a team of trusted engineers, security experts, and legal advisors. The walls felt like they were closing in on them. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, the moment when they would begin to fight back. But the weight of what they were facing was crushing. They couldn't do this alone. The forces against them were too powerful, and the stakes were too high. Elon's mind raced as he looked over the team gathered in front of him. Each person was there for a reason. Each of them had an expertise that could help protect the breakthrough they had worked so hard to create. The engine technology was more than just a new invention. It was a potential revolution. And they were surrounded by enemies who would do anything to seize it. Sarah, sitting across from Elon, was still grappling with the enormity of what was happening. Her mind was caught between two worlds, the one she had grown up in, where she was just a teenager with big ideas, and the one she was now thrust into, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. She wasn't just working on an invention anymore. She wasn't just dreaming about changing the world. She was fighting to protect it. Her fingers trembled as she looked down at the documents in front of her. There were contracts to sign, encrypted communications to be sent, and strategies to consider. It all felt so overwhelming. She had never imagined that her idea would put her in the middle of a global battle for control over the future of energy. The team worked tirelessly, with engineers and security experts collaborating to create an impenetrable system to protect the technology. But every time they thought they had a solution, the attacks grew more sophisticated. The hackers grew bolder. There were even rumors of corporate espionage within Tesla itself, whispers that not everyone in the company could be trusted. The deeper they dug into the conspiracy, the more they realized the true scale of what they were up against. They weren't just fighting shadowy figures from underground organizations anymore. They were up against corporations, governments, and power structures that had everything to lose if Sarah and Elon's technology succeeded. Every move they made was being watched. Every piece of information they released could be twisted and used against them. They were being hunted, and the world around them was filled with enemies, some of whom had been playing this game far longer than they had. One night, as Elon stared at the glowing screen of his computer, a message flashed on his encrypted phone. The subject line read, "We know what you're doing." A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Someone out there knew exactly what they were planning, and they were getting closer. Sarah's eyes widened as she read over Elon's shoulder. She had seen the increasing number of attacks, but this message, this one felt different. It was too specific, too pointed. It wasn't just about stealing technology anymore. It was about erasing them. Whoever was behind this wanted to make sure they didn't succeed, no matter the cost. Elon clenched his jaw, determination hardening in his features. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But this is bigger than we thought. We can't afford to hesitate. The technology is too important, and now we have to protect it, not just from hackers, but from the very systems we're trying to change." As the team continued to develop countermeasures and tighten security, Sarah began to understand what it truly meant to be part of this high-stakes game. She had always known that the technology could change the world, but now she realized the immense responsibility that came with that power. It wasn't just about creating something new. It was about defending the future from being controlled by those who sought to misuse it. The stakes had moved far beyond just business or competition. This was a battle for humanity's future, and it wasn't going to be won with innovation alone. They would have to fight, and fight hard, to protect what they had created. In the midst of the tension, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn into the battle. At first, she had been a passive player, an inventor with a brilliant idea, working under Elon's guidance. But now she understood that she had no choice but to step up and become an active participant in the fight. Every decision she made would have consequences, not just for her, but for the entire world. She could no longer afford to hide behind the safety of her innocence. She had to face the consequences of her actions head-on, and that meant understanding the true weight of her creation. Every sleepless night, every risk they took, brought them closer to the battle they would inevitably face. Sarah knew that there was no turning back. This wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about survival, her survival, Elon's survival, and the survival of the future they had worked so hard to build. For a while, things seemed deceptively quiet. Elon and Sarah had managed to secure their technology, locking it behind layers of encryption, firewalls, and constant surveillance. The development of the engine continued, albeit with heightened caution. Tesla's best engineers and security experts worked around the clock, creating barriers to protect the breakthrough. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Elon's focus was unwavering, and Sarah pushed forward with an energy that matched his. Yet, beneath this outward calm, Sarah couldn't shake the unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. There was something in the air, an electric charge that hadn't been there before. The silence felt too still, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Every decision, every move they made, felt like it was building up to something far bigger, something inevitable. She could feel it in the way people moved, quickly, with urgency. She could see it in the way Elon's eyes would occasionally flicker toward the door, as if he too could sense the growing tension, though he never voiced it. Everyone around them had become a little more alert, more cautious. Their tight-knit team, once filled with excitement over the possibilities, now carried an underlying tension, as if they were all waiting for something to go wrong. And yet, nothing happened. The days passed in a blur of coding, testing, and strategizing. They celebrated small victories, improvements in the engine's efficiency, breakthroughs in energy storage. But the weight of what they were working on was always there, looming. The technology was too important and too powerful to remain in their control forever. But still, the threat felt abstract, something on the horizon, just out of reach. What Sarah didn't know was that during these quiet days, Their enemies were already preparing for their next move. Somewhere, in the shadows, a network of unseen players was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their eyes were on Elon and Sarah on the groundbreaking engine they had developed, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted, at any cost. As Sarah sat in her office late one evening, reviewing data, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. It was a fleeting sensation, but it was enough to make her glance toward the window. The city outside was still, the lights in the distance twinkling like stars, but something about the silence felt too heavy. It was the calm before the storm, she thought, feeling a chill creep up her spine. Elon, too, had felt it. The uneasy quiet, the storm on the horizon that no one had quite been able to name. They had thought they had secured everything, technologically, politically, and even financially. But Elon knew better. There was always another threat, a darker force waiting in the wings, ready to exploit any vulnerability. The deeper they dug into their creation, the more they realized how many powerful forces could be affected by their work. And with that realization came the inevitable truth. They were too visible now, too exposed. The calm was deceptive. Behind closed doors, in hidden offices, their enemies were strategizing, watching, learning. And soon, they would make their move. They were preparing for war, silent, calculated, and patient. The first strike would be subtle, but devastating. Elon and Sarah wouldn't even know what hit them. It happened when they least expected it. After weeks of careful planning and a false sense of security, an anonymous hacker breached their defenses. The intrusion was swift, silent, and devastating. At first, Elon and Sarah didn't notice. Nothing felt different. The systems were still running, their work was still on track. But then the signs appeared. A slight glitch in the data flow, a momentary delay in access to certain files. Elon dismissed it as a minor issue, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. An anonymous hacker had accessed their most sensitive files, detailed blueprints of the engine, proprietary data, and even their security protocols, and released it all to the public. The floodgates opened wide, and in an instant, the world was exposed to their groundbreaking technology. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about the leak, and online forums buzzed with debates over the potential implications of the engine's capabilities. What had once been their most carefully guarded secret was now available to anyone with a computer and a desire to exploit it. The chaos that followed was unimaginable. The stock market reacted violently, and competitors pounced, scrambling to claim their piece of the pie. The media, both public and private, descended like vultures, questioning not only the technology, but the ethics behind it. Governments, tech companies, and rogue factions all took an interest, their intentions unclear, but undeniably dangerous. In the midst of this whirlwind, Elon and Sarah were left reeling. They had hoped to control the narrative, to slowly and carefully reveal their work to the world on their own terms. But now, they were no longer in control. The technology, which had been their most valuable asset, was now a free-for-all. And the stakes had never been higher. The weight of their situation began to sink in. They realized they were no longer just fighting against an individual or a group of hackers. They were facing an all-out war for control over their creation. The enemies they had once suspected, powerful tech conglomerates, foreign governments, and rogue organizations, had grown bolder. They were no longer working in the shadows. They were now brazenly after what Sarah and Elon had built. The floodgates had opened. The technology was out in the world, and they could never take it back. Every move they made from now on would be watched, scrutinized, and manipulated. What had been an abstract threat had now become an imminent reality, and their enemies were already mobilizing. Elon, once the master of strategy and control, now found himself scrambling. He had always known that bringing this technology into the world would attract attention, but the speed and intensity of the response were overwhelming. This wasn't just a race to develop technology, it was a race to protect the future of the technology itself. They were up against forces with far more resources and reach than they had ever imagined. Sarah felt the panic rising in her chest. The world had just discovered what she had created, and she realized that they would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. The technology wasn't just a tool for innovation. It had become a weapon, a key to unimaginable power, and the fight for it was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it was going to change everything. For the first time, Sarah and Elon truly understood the consequences of their invention. They had started with a dream to change the world for the better, to create something that could reshape energy and transportation for generations to come. But now, that dream was on the edge of becoming a nightmare. The clock was ticking, and they were racing against time, trying to contain the chaos, protect their work, and navigate the growing web of adversaries that now surrounded them. As the news of the leak spread like wildfire, so did the attacks. The breach had opened Pandora's box, and what followed was a barrage of relentless strikes, each one more dangerous than the last. It started with cyber assaults. Their systems, once considered impenetrable, were suddenly under siege. Untraceable malware swept through their networks, crippling their infrastructure and leaving Elon and Sarah scrambling to restore order. Data that had once been tightly secured was now exposed, vulnerable to anyone with the right knowledge and resources. The enemy was no longer hiding in the shadows. They were out in the open, and they were playing dirty. Then came the personal threats. Emails, phone calls, and even anonymous messages flooded in. Elon's private details were being leaked. Sarah's family began receiving unsettling phone calls, their safety jeopardized in ways neither of them could have anticipated. It wasn't just the technology anymore. It was their lives. The world was no longer simply aware of their invention. It had become a weapon to be wielded against them. Their families were now pawns in this ruthless game, and the psychological toll was just as devastating as the digital warfare they were facing. Elon's normally calm demeanor started to crack under the weight of the pressure. He had faced corporate rivals before, but this was different. This wasn't just about business. This was personal. The enemy wasn't just attacking their technology, they were targeting everything Elon and Sarah held dear. Sarah, too, felt the weight of the new reality. She had never imagined that her creation would lead to such a battle. What started as a dream to change the world now felt like a curse. The more she tried to focus on the technology, the more she found herself distracted by the danger looming over her loved ones. It was a constant fight to keep her mind on the task at hand, but they could not afford to let the fear paralyze them. Elon and Sarah knew that the longer they stayed defensive, the more they would lose. They had to go on the offensive. They immediately tapped into every resource at their disposal. Tesla's elite cybersecurity team, private investigators, even former military strategists who had experience in combating digital and physical threats. The world had underestimated them before, but now they had no choice but to fight back with everything they had. Their first step was to track down the group responsible for the leak. They began unraveling the digital trail left by the hackers, tracing the encrypted packets and trying to find the one mistake that would lead them to the perpetrators. It was a battle of wits, hacking skills, and intellect. Elon, with his sharp mind and tactical approach, coordinated the efforts, while Sarah worked tirelessly with the tech team to develop new countermeasures. Every lead they followed, however, seemed to vanish, replaced by dead ends and false trails. It wasn't just a fight to protect their technology anymore, it was a fight for control. Whoever controlled this technology now controlled the future. The engine Sarah had created could revolutionize energy, save billions of dollars, and drastically reduce humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. But in the wrong hands, it could become a weapon capable of wreaking havoc on a global scale. As the battle intensified, Elon realized that the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just a fight to protect an invention. It was a fight to safeguard the future itself. The technology could either uplift humanity or be twisted into something destructive, depending on who ultimately seized control. The clock was ticking. They knew that whoever was behind the leak had already begun moving to claim what was rightfully theirs. And if they didn't act quickly, they might lose more than just their technology. They might lose the future they were fighting to create. The time had come to face the enemy directly. After weeks of relentless cyber attacks, dead ends, and false leads, Elon and Sarah had finally uncovered the identity of the organization behind the leak. They had known their enemies were powerful, but this was beyond what they had imagined. The group responsible wasn't some rogue hacker or underground collective. They were a massive tech conglomerate with vast resources, a global reach, and a dangerous agenda. What's worse, they had been secretly developing their own version of the engine, the one Sarah had invented, but with far darker intentions. This was no longer just a battle for control over a groundbreaking invention. It was a fight for the future itself. The conglomerate didn't want the engine to save the world. They wanted it to control it. They had plans to weaponize the technology, using it to monopolize the world's energy and reshape the political landscape, all for their own gain. This was not just an ethical breach. It was a threat to the very foundation of freedom and innovation. Elon and Sarah knew they couldn't hide any longer. The confrontation was inevitable. The enemy had taken everything they could. Now they were going to take everything else unless they fought back with everything they had. A tense meeting was arranged. In a stark, nondescript office building deep in the heart of the city, Elon and Sarah stood across from the leader of the enemy organization. His presence was as cold and calculating as the technology he sought to control. The room was devoid of warmth, the walls lined with dark glass and sterile furniture, every detail designed to unsettle. The leader, a tall man in his late 40s dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, smiled at them as if he had already won. His cold, piercing gaze didn't falter as he spoke. "I've read your work, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "Brilliant. Truly. It's almost a shame that someone so idealistic had to create something that could shape the future. Unfortunately, the future doesn't work that way." Elon's eyes narrowed. There was no mistaking the threat in his words. The man didn't want to discuss ideas. He wanted to take what Sarah had created and twist it to serve his own vision. Sarah clenched her fists at her sides. This man wasn't just a business leader. He was a puppet master, controlling an empire built on deception, manipulation, and the exploitation of technology. And now, he was standing in front of her, calmly explaining how her life's work would be used to tighten his grip on the world. "Your vision is a perversion of what this technology could do," Elon said, his voice tense but steady. "We created this to empower people, to change the world for the better, not for profit or control. If you think we'll let you take it, you're gravely mistaken." The leader's expression shifted slightly, as if mildly entertained by their defiance. "You misunderstand, Elon. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to offer you an opportunity. Join me. Together, we could reshape the world, control energy, transportation, communications. You'd have all the power you could dream of." Sarah took a step forward, her voice shaking but firm. "This is our technology, and you have no right to use it like this. We built it to free people, not to enslave them." A chilling silence filled the room. The leader studied them both for a long moment, weighing his options. His cold smile never wavered, but the underlying menace was clear. You think the world is ready for that kind of change, for a system that empowers everyone equally? You're naive, Sarah. There are forces at play you can't even begin to understand. You're out of your depth. Sarah's stomach twisted with anger, but she held her ground. She realized then that this wasn't just a business deal. It was a philosophical war. She and Elon were fighting for the heart of their creation, but the stakes were far higher. This was about the kind of world they wanted to live in, and what kind of legacy they would leave. With a deep breath, Elon spoke again, more resolute than ever. We've already made our choice. We'll fight to protect what we've created, no matter the cost. The future isn't yours to control. The leader's smile faltered for a brief moment, and in that instant, Sarah could see the man's true nature. A ruthless, calculating individual who would stop at nothing to achieve his vision. But Elon and Sarah were no longer just inventors. They were warriors now. The room grew colder, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The choice was clear. They had no more room for negotiation. It was time for battle. You may have made your choice, but so have we, the leader said, his voice like ice. You've just signed your own death warrant. With those words, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Elon and Sarah standing in the silence of the aftermath. The calm before the storm had ended. The war was on, and there was no turning back. The showdown was inevitable. After months of increasing tension and near-constant attacks, Elon and Sarah's team was finally ready to face their enemies head-on. With every passing day, the pressure had mounted. The stakes had never been higher. They had fortified their systems with state-of-the-art cybersecurity measures, recruited experts in physical security, and devised countermeasures to outwit the enemy. But this battle was about more than technology. It was about survival, control, and the future. The enemy, a tech conglomerate with far greater resources and influence, had finally forced their hand. They had tracked Elon and Sarah's every move, watching as they strengthened their defenses. And now it was time for the ultimate confrontation. In a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location chosen for its strategic importance, the final showdown began. This was no longer a battle for a piece of technology. It was a war for the future itself. Elon and Sarah stood side by side, their team in place, each person holding their breath as they waited for the first move. The enemy's presence was palpable, their vast network ready to launch their final assault. Their goal was simple: seize control of the engine technology at all costs. The question was whether Elon and Sarah's ingenuity and resolve could match the power and resources of a multi-billion-dollar empire. In the darkness of the warehouse, a single light flickered as the first wave of attacks began. Hackers launched coordinated cyber offensives, trying to breach their security. But this time, the team was ready. Every firewall, every encryption algorithm they had developed was tested to its limit. The tension in the air was suffocating as the digital battlefield raged on. Elon's eyes were fixed on the screen in front of him, every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. He moved swiftly, directing the team's efforts, each command precise and calculated. His mind raced through strategies, constantly analyzing, always adjusting. Sarah stood beside him, equally focused. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let fear take control. This was their moment to prove they could protect their creation. Outside, their physical security team prepared for the worst. If the enemy was able to breach the digital defenses, they knew the next move would be an attempt to physically steal the technology. Armed guards stationed around the perimeter were on high alert, ready to respond to any threat. Every precaution had been taken, but still, there was no guarantee they would succeed. As the hours passed, the battle intensified. the enemy grew desperate. Every move they made was countered by Elon and Sarah's team, who were learning and adapting faster than their opponents could anticipate. It was a battle of intellect, strategy, and sheer willpower. The sound of typing, the clattering of keyboards, and the quiet hum of machines were the only things that filled the room. Then, a breakthrough. Elon's eyes widened as he realized they had found a flaw in the enemy's attack. A small, unnoticed opening in their defense network. With a sharp command, he and Sarah worked together, executing a counteroffensive that brought down the enemy's primary server. The victory was short-lived, but significant. Their adversaries were thrown off balance. They had been too focused on trying to break in, neglecting the weaknesses within their own system. But the enemy wasn't done. In retaliation, they unleashed a final wave, a desperate, all-out assault that targeted everything Elon and Sarah had worked to protect. The room seemed to pulse with the tension, and the ground beneath their feet felt like it was shaking. Every move, every choice was crucial. One misstep could lead to their destruction. In that moment of ultimate crisis, Sarah's mind went back to everything she had fought for, the technology, the vision of a better world, and the people she loved. Her determination, forged through months of struggle and pain, crystallized into a single thought: not today. With a final, coordinated strike, Sarah and Elon executed a daring plan to disable the enemy's most powerful assets. It was risky, but it worked. The enemy's systems crumbled, their servers going dark one by one, until only silence remained. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As Elon and Sarah stood victorious, their hearts still racing, the magnitude of what they had just accomplished began to sink in. The enemy had been defeated, but the forces aligned against them were vast, and their control over the future was far from certain. The technology, though safe for the moment, was still a coveted prize. This fight had bought them time, but the war for control over it would continue. The victory, though hard-won, was bittersweet. The world would soon realize what had happened, and the reverberations of this battle would echo throughout the world. New enemies would rise, new challenges would emerge. But for now, Elon and Sarah stood together, knowing they had fought for more than just their creation. They had fought for a future where technology could empower humanity, not control it. And they would continue to fight for that future. No matter what, the battle was over. For now. Elon and Sarah stood in the quiet aftermath, looking out over the skyline from Tesla's headquarters. The world had started to take notice. News outlets buzzed with headlines, and tech forums were flooded with discussions about the groundbreaking engine technology they had created. Some hailed it as the dawn of a new era in energy. Others were wary, questioning the implications of such a powerful discovery. But one thing was clear: their creation had captured the world's attention. Despite the victory, the weight of the responsibility they now carried was heavier than ever. They had successfully safeguarded their technology, for now. But the realization hit them both with a quiet, undeniable truth. This was only the beginning. For months, they had fought to keep their invention from falling into the wrong hands. Now that it was out in the world, the challenges would only multiply. Governments, corporations, and underground organizations were all watching closely, each of them weighing the potential of the engine for their own agendas. And for every ally they found, there would be more enemies lurking in the shadows. The world was on the precipice of a monumental shift, and Sarah knew it. She had gone from being a hopeful inventor, consumed by the excitement of discovery, to a leader in the fight for the future of technology. Her dream was no longer just about innovation. It was about the power of that innovation to shape the future for good, and the struggle to protect it from those who would exploit it for power or profit. Elon, too, had changed. No longer just a visionary entrepreneur, He had become a staunch defender of the values that had guided his career. He had always believed in the transformative power of technology to change the world. But now, more than ever, he understood that such power needed to be guarded carefully. Standing by Sarah's side, fully invested in the cause, Elon was more committed than ever to ensuring that their creation would be used to benefit humanity, not control it. As they watched the world around them start to take shape in the wake of their technology, a quiet determination settled between them. They had won this battle, but the war for the future was far from over. The power of their engine could bring about incredible change, cleaner energy, affordable transportation, and the potential to combat the climate crisis. But it could also be twisted into a tool for global dominance, environmental destruction, or worse. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, as she turned to Elon. It was a simple question, but the weight of it hung in the air. What would they do with the power they had fought so hard to protect? Elon paused, looking out at the horizon. His face was filled with both resolve and caution. "We take the next step carefully. We build the world we want to see. But we also make sure we're prepared for whatever comes next. The technology is too important to let fall into the wrong hands again." Sarah nodded, her own resolve hardening. She was no longer the naive teenager who had emailed Elon Musk with a revolutionary idea. She had become someone who understood the true cost of innovation. The price of progress was not just in invention, but in the responsibility to protect it. The engine was her creation, but now it was the world's, and it was her job to ensure it was used to uplift, not exploit. Together, they would continue to fight for a world where their creation could be a force for good. They would face new challenges, both external and internal, and with every challenge, they would have to stay one step ahead. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they were no longer just inventors. They were stewards of the future. They would fight to ensure that their invention would benefit humanity, bringing about the change they had always dreamed of, while protecting it from those who would abuse it. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Elon knew they were ready. The battle might have been won, but their fight was far from over. A new world was waiting to be shaped, and they would shape it together. The engine technology was complete. After years of research, countless sleepless nights, and millions of calculations, the moment of triumph had arrived. The final prototype stood ready, its sleek design a symbol of everything they had worked for. Elon and Sarah stood together in the dim light of the lab, watching as the machine hummed to life. The energy output was unprecedented, the efficiency beyond anything they had imagined. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for, a technology that could potentially revolutionize the way the world produced and consumed energy. As the news spread, the world took notice. Headlines across the globe hailed the new engine as a game changer, a bold step toward a cleaner, sustainable future. The possibilities were immense. Global energy consumption could be reduced, the reliance on fossil fuels diminished, and nations could begin the long road to tackling the climate crisis. Governments, environmentalists, and corporations all expressed interest in this new technology, each eager to explore its potential. Elon and Sarah basked in the initial euphoria, their hearts swelling with pride at the impact their invention could have. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to believe that they had achieved the impossible. They had created something that could fundamentally shift the course of history. But the excitement soon faded, replaced by an unsettling sense of responsibility. As the implications of their creation began to unfold, the weight of their work grew heavier. Elon and Sarah realized that the power they had unlocked wasn't just a tool for progress. It was a force that could reshape the world in ways they hadn't anticipated. While they had dreamed of making the world a better place, they now understood that the technology could be used to control, manipulate, or destroy as easily as it could be used to save. There were those out there, powerful corporations, governments, and rogue actors, who wouldn't just want to use the technology, they would want to control it, to use it as leverage in political, economic, or military games. The temptation for greed and power was boundless. Some might see the technology as a means to monopolize energy, locking countries, corporations, and individuals into systems they could control. Others might use it as a weapon, devastating entire regions if the wrong hands got hold of it. Sarah felt it the most. She had started as an inventor, driven by a desire to change the world, to leave a legacy that mattered. But now, with the weight of the world on her shoulders, she could see the darker side of what they had created. This wasn't just a piece of technology anymore, it was a key to the future. A key that, in the wrong hands, could unlock a Pandora's box. As she stood beside Elon, watching the celebrations unfold in the media, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental, something that could spiral out of control if they weren't careful. What had started as a dream of progress now seemed much more fragile. They had given the world the means to change, but they had also handed it a powerful tool that could be misused in unimaginable ways. Elon, too, began to feel the weight of their creation. He had always understood the potential risks of innovation, but this was different. They hadn't just created a new product. They had opened a door to a new era, one that demanded careful guidance and control. The technology, in its raw form, was too powerful to be left unchecked, and yet they had no way of controlling how others might use it. They could only hope that the world would be ready to handle the consequences. In private, Elon and Sarah began to discuss their options. They had to find a way to safeguard the technology, to ensure it would be used ethically and responsibly. There was no turning back. The world was now aware of what they had created, and with that awareness came a new set of challenges. It wasn't enough to just deploy the engine and walk away. They had to protect it, and the world, from the people who would try to exploit it for their own purposes. The decision weighed heavily on both of them. Could they really manage the world's expectations while protecting the technology they had worked so hard to create? Was it even possible to control the distribution of such a powerful tool? Or would the forces of greed and ambition overtake their best efforts? As Sarah looked out over the horizon, watching the world begin to change, she knew that this was just the beginning. They had started a revolution, but now they had to make sure it didn't spiral into something unmanageable. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, political battles, corporate espionage, and, most likely, personal threats. But one thing was clear: they couldn't afford to fail. The world was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. Elon and Sarah stood together in the heart of Tesla's headquarters, facing the gravity of the decision they had just made. The engine technology was complete, but its implications stretched far beyond the lab. They could no longer afford to be naive. The world had seen what they had created, and the response was overwhelming. But as the excitement settled, they both knew that their creation held immense power, and power was a double-edged sword. The reality of what they had unleashed on the world had begun to sink in. They had dreamed of changing the world for the better, of creating a new energy source that would eliminate the need for fossil fuels and reduce global dependence on polluting resources. But now, that very same technology, with its unprecedented efficiency, was also a beacon for those who would seek to manipulate it for control. The same forces that had tried to take it from them before would continue to lurk in the shadows, waiting for any crack in their defenses. After long nights of deliberation and careful analysis, Elon and Sarah made the difficult choice to move forward, but with a much more cautious approach. They would continue to develop the technology, but they had to limit its immediate availability. The technology was too powerful too dangerous to be released into the world without safeguards. The last thing they wanted was to see their invention fall into the hands of those who would use it to harm the very people it was meant to help. Elon's voice was steady, but there was a determination behind it that Sarah hadn't seen before. We can't let this be used as a weapon. We need to protect it, but we can't hide it forever. It's too important for the world not to see. We just have to make sure it's shared responsibly. Sarah nodded, but there was a certain heaviness to the decision. She had always been driven by the desire to share knowledge, to see the world benefit from her inventions. But now, it felt like they were locking up the very thing that could save humanity. And it felt wrong. Still, she understood. They had no choice. "We'll control the distribution," she said, her voice thoughtful but firm. "We'll release it in phases, a portion at a time, to carefully vetted partners, governments, energy organizations, scientific institutions. No one person or group can monopolize it." They both knew that this decision would change the course of their journey. They would not be able to give the technology to everyone at once. Instead, they would have to choose carefully who had access to it. But it wasn't just about deciding who got the technology. It was about deciding how it would be used and who could benefit from it without turning it into a tool of oppression or control. The real challenge would be monitoring its impact. Would nations and corporations use it to accelerate progress, or would they simply seize it for their own power? Sarah and Elon knew that any technology, no matter how noble its origin, could easily be corrupted when put into the wrong hands, and they couldn't afford to let that happen. "The key," Elon continued, "is to make sure it can't be misused. We'll have to implement strict guidelines on its usage. If someone tries to use it for military purposes or to control entire populations, we'll shut them down immediately. We'll need to work with international organizations to ensure the technology is used ethically." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing with the implications of their plan. She had envisioned a world where their creation would be used freely, to help everyone. But now, that vision had to be tempered with caution. It was hard to accept, but she understood that the alternative, giving unrestricted access to a technology this powerful, could lead to the very disasters they were trying to avoid. "This is bigger than just us now," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just about protecting our creation. It's about ensuring the future of the entire planet. If we do this right, we can change the world. But if we fail, it could be worse than what we're trying to fix." Elon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't fail. We have the tools to protect this, and we have the responsibility to make sure it's used for the good of all. We'll stay ahead of them. Together, we can control the narrative." Sarah had always been driven by a sense of idealism. Her work was never just about the science, the numbers, or the accolades. She had always believed that what she was creating would help change the world, solving problems of energy inefficiency, pollution, and reliance on fossil fuels. It had always been about progress for the greater good. But as the world's attention shifted toward their invention, Sarah began to see things in a new light. The immense power of the technology they had created was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a breakthrough anymore. It was a force that could reshape the entire global order. And with that power came the realization that they weren't just inventors anymore. They were the stewards of the future. The moment she understood the true weight of their work came quietly, in the stillness of the night, as she sat at her desk, watching the glow of the city lights through the window. The media, the praise, the excitement, everything felt far away now. All she could think about was the truth of what they had set in motion. It was an unsettling truth. The technology they had created could be used to change the world in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little control they truly had over its potential impact. Governments, corporations, and even individuals had already started to lobby for access to their engine technology. People didn't just want to use it for cleaner energy, they wanted to use it to gain power. What had started as a mission to protect the planet now felt like it could easily slip into a global game of manipulation and control. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she understood. They were now the gatekeepers. She turned to Elon, who had been quietly observing her for days. The exhaustion was evident in his eyes, but beneath it, there was an unwavering resolve. He, too, understood the scale of the responsibility they now bore. "I didn't realize it would be like this," Sarah said, her voice softer than usual. "It was supposed to be simple. We made something that could change the world for the better, but now it feels like we've unleashed something dangerous, something that could be used against us, against everyone." Elon stood beside her, his expression grave. "It always happens this way. Innovation has consequences. We wanted to make the world better, but we have to accept that there will always be people who want to control it for their own gain. We've opened a door, and now we have to make sure it doesn't close, in a way we can't control." Sarah looked at him, seeing the weight of the decision they had made reflected in his eyes. "But how do we control it? How do we make sure it's used for good and not for power? We're not just giving people a cleaner future, we're giving them control over the world's energy. That's something no one should have unchecked." Elon nodded slowly. "That's why we have to be strategic. It's not just about the technology itself, it's about the responsibility we now carry. We have to ensure that the distribution is controlled and monitored. We can't afford to let it become a weapon. If we don't guard it, others will." As Sarah listened to Elon, she realized the truth. They were no longer just inventors. They were guardians. Guardians of the future. Guardians of the balance between progress and responsibility. The choices they made now would determine how their invention would affect generations to come. It wasn't just about who had access to the engine. It was about the ethical use of the technology. The delicate balance between giving the world access to something that could transform lives and preventing it from being twisted into something that could tear the world apart. The moment she understood this truth, this weight, was the moment she realized how far she had come. She wasn't just creating an invention anymore. She was now fighting for the very soul of their creation, ensuring that its power would not be exploited. But with that realization came fear. The fear that their creation, no matter how good its intentions, could be manipulated by forces they could never predict. "We need to put safeguards in place," Sarah said, her voice steady now, but filled with resolve. "We need to create a system where access is granted on the basis of trust, not power. We need oversight, transparency, and accountability. It's not enough to just protect the tech from being stolen. We need to protect it from being misused." Elon smiled faintly, proud of the strength Sarah had shown. "Exactly. The work doesn't end when we hand it over. That's where it begins. We've built something that could change the world, but now we have to make sure it does change it. For the better." Sarah nodded, a sense of clarity washing over her. The weight of the future still hung heavy in her mind, but she knew that the decisions they made now would be crucial. It wasn't about holding on to the invention forever. It was about guiding it with care, ensuring that its power was used responsibly, and building a system of protection that could safeguard its potential. The road ahead would be difficult. They had already seen the lengths people would go to seize control of the technology. But Sarah knew deep down that they had made the right choice. They weren't just creating the future, they were shaping it, and they would continue to fight for the future they believed in, no matter the obstacles. Elon and Sarah's approach worked. Slowly but steadily, they began to see the fruits of their labor. The systems they had put in place to control the distribution of their groundbreaking engine technology began to take effect. Their plan to release it in small, manageable portions to carefully vetted organizations, governments, and energy institutions was starting to unfold as they'd envisioned. Through strategic partnerships and strict oversight, they had managed to create a system that allowed them to monitor every facet of the technology's use. They had developed a multi-layered fail-safe distribution process that ensured ethical oversight. Every organization that gained access to the engine technology was required to meet stringent criteria: transparency, environmental goals, and social responsibility. Any company or government entity that wished to deploy the technology had to agree to specific guidelines that prevented weaponization or exploitation. To prevent monopolization, they established a global coalition to ensure that no single entity could control the engine for profit-driven motives alone. But even as they began to see the positive effects of their hard work, the technology being used to power entire cities with clean energy, governments rolling back their reliance on fossil fuels, and corporations reducing their carbon footprints, they couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly over. Sarah sat in her office late one evening, reviewing reports on the success of the engine's deployment. On the surface, things seemed to be progressing as planned. Clean energy was being deployed on a scale they had dreamed of. The world was starting to shift toward a more sustainable future. Yet something gnawed at her, a sense of unease that hadn't left her since the technology's first public release. Despite their precautions, there were still gaps in their system. As the world adapted to this new reality, new threats began to emerge. Some nations were already attempting to circumvent the rules they had set, using backdoor deals to bypass the restrictions on the technology. Elon shared her concerns. In meetings with their global partners, they had begun to see cracks in the foundation they had worked so hard to build. A handful of rogue actors, driven by ambition and greed, had already begun to manipulate the technology's potential for their own gain, trying to amass power by exploiting the energy it produced. Some governments were even covertly starting to weaponize the energy, creating power plants in secret locations under the guise of research facilities. "We've put safeguards in place," Elon said one evening, pacing in front of a large monitor displaying real-time global energy data. "But the moment we turn our backs, someone will try to find a way around them. The world is full of people who will exploit this power for personal gain. We can't afford to trust anyone completely." Sarah looked up from the report, her brow furrowed. She knew he was right. The technology was too powerful. They had built safeguards, but they could only do so much. The more they gave to the world, the more they were forced to trust others, and trust was a commodity in short supply. Even with the best intentions, those in power were still susceptible to the temptations of control and greed. "We can't just sit back and monitor," Sarah said, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "We have to anticipate these moves. We need to stay ahead of them, constantly evolving our systems to stay one step ahead of those who would misuse it." Elon paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He turned to her with a determined expression. "I agree. We need to continue building a coalition, not just of governments and energy companies, but of people. We can't control this alone. We need a global network of oversight. Scientists, watchdogs, independent organizations, people who are committed to the common good, not profit or power." They both understood the stakes. It wasn't just about securing the technology. It was about ensuring the future was shaped ethically. The world could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands again, and they couldn't afford to risk the good they had created being twisted by the very systems they were trying to fix. As they sat together, working through plans and new systems for accountability, Sarah reflected on the weight of their responsibility. She no longer saw herself just as the inventor of the engine. She saw herself as a custodian of the future, an overseer of a new world order that they had started but couldn't control completely. They were just two people, and the forces they were up against were vast. But as the days passed, they remained resolute. They continued to refine their technology's safeguards, implementing real-time monitoring and adaptive systems that could change with the threats that arose. They strengthened their partnerships with the Global Energy Coalition, and Elon, with his usual charisma and resolve, began to rally more world leaders to the cause. This wasn't just about technology. It was about creating a foundation for a future where the collective good came first. "We've made the first step," Elon said as they watched another successful deployment of the engine in a major city. "But we'll never be finished. We'll always have to stay vigilant, always keep improving. We've set the foundation, but now we need to make sure it lasts." Sarah smiled faintly, understanding the truth of his words. The fight was far from over. This wasn't a single victory. It was a new beginning. They had won a battle, but they were now in a constant evolving fight to ensure the ethical use of the technology they had created. The technology wasn't just a key to a sustainable future. It was a symbol of humanity's potential. But the real work was in ensuring that potential was never abused. The enemy, unable to accept defeat, made one last desperate attempt to seize control of the engine technology. This time, however, Elon and Sarah were ready. They had anticipated the move, and every step they took was meticulously planned. The enemy's forces were vast, but Elon and Sarah had spent months fortifying not just their technology, but their resolve. They were no longer just inventors. They were protectors of their creation, guarding it from those who would use it for greed and power. As the final assault unfolded, Elon took the lead in counteracting the enemy's hacking attempts, while Sarah worked with their security team to safeguard the physical infrastructure. This was no longer a battle of innovation. It was a battle for the soul of the future. The tension was palpable as Elon's team dismantled the enemy's cyber attacks, and Sarah's security team held the line, facing off against physical threats. With a final, coordinated strike, they overwhelmed the enemy's last-ditch effort to steal the technology. In the end, Elon and Sarah's ingenuity and preparedness won out. But even as the dust settled, they knew the war wasn't over. The victory, though hard-earned, was just a temporary reprieve. The fight for control over their technology and the future it represented would continue. The true test was still ahead. Together, Elon and Sarah stood at the threshold of a new era. Their invention, once just a dream, had now sparked a revolution, a shift towards a sustainable future where energy was no longer a commodity to be hoarded, but a shared resource for the greater good. They had done what so many had only imagined. They had created a technology that could reshape the world and offer hope for the generations to come. But as they gazed out at the world that was slowly beginning to change, they knew deep down that this was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The road ahead would not be easy, and the challenges would continue to evolve. The fight for a better future didn't end with the success of their technology. It was merely the first step in a long, ongoing effort to ensure that the future they had started building would be worth living for everyone, not just the privileged few. Sarah, standing beside Elon, could feel the weight of their responsibility more than ever. The excitement that once filled her heart now mingled with a quiet but resolute understanding. True change would take time. It wouldn't just be about distributing technology or achieving short-term success. It would be about ensuring that the world's collective future was safeguarded and that no one would be left behind. "We've given them the tools," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with both pride and a deep sense of responsibility. "But it's up to all of us to make sure it's used right. This is a chance to build something beautiful, something that empowers all of humanity, not just those who can afford it." Elon nodded, his gaze steady, as he looked out at the horizon, where the world was beginning to change. "This is bigger than anything we could have imagined when we started. But every step forward is a new responsibility. We can't just hope it will be used for good. We need to ensure it. We need to be vigilant, and we need to keep fighting for what's right. They weren't naive. They both knew the temptations of power and the potential for exploitation. Their creation was a tool, yes, but it was also a symbol of hope, of progress, and of the promise of a better world. Yet it could also be a weapon if not protected. There would always be those who would try to bend it to their will, who would seek to monopolize its potential for personal gain. But as they reflected on their journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt, they realized that they had become more than just creators of a new technology. They had become stewards of the future. And as stewards, they couldn't afford to rest. Their vision was clear, a world where their creation could thrive and empower all people, not just a select few. They had the power to shape the future, and now it was their duty to ensure it was a future that was just, sustainable, and equitable. "The hardest part of this," Elon said quietly, turning to Sarah with a look of quiet determination, "is knowing that we don't have all the answers. But we do have the vision, and we have the ability to bring others along with us. We can't do it alone, but together we can ensure that the world will change for the better." Sarah met his gaze, her heart full of conviction. The challenges they faced would be many, but they knew they were not alone in this fight. They had already begun to build a coalition: scientists, ethicists, policymakers, and everyday citizens, all of whom shared in the vision of a future where technology was used to benefit humanity as a whole. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood in quiet solidarity, knowing that the work they had done was only the beginning. The world was watching, and their technology was now a part of the world's story. But it was the choices they made next, the choices about how to distribute it, how to protect it, and how to shape the systems around it, that would ultimately determine whether their invention would create the future they envisioned or be twisted by the forces of greed and power. But for now, as they stood together in the quiet of the evening, they knew they had made the right choice. They had built something worth fighting for. And as long as they had breath, they would continue to fight, not just for the technology, but for the world that could rise from it. Because the future, they realized, wasn't something you could just hand over to the next generation. It was something you had to shape, protect, and nurture every single day.